Hi, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're joining us from for our webinar today. We'd like to thank you for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about scaling your workforce without spinning out of control. We've got a great webinar for you and a great panelist for you today. So I'm going to start with a little housekeeping before we get started into the meat of the presentation. So the webinar is being recorded, so hopefully you can stay with us the whole time. If not, you'll be able to access the recording. We will take questions at the end if you have any questions, and we will actually be using the chat panel for the questions, so you can locate that, and we'll actually help you locate that in a few minutes as well, but you can ask questions of the panel. If there are any that come up while we're going through the slides, we may stop and take them if it makes sense. If not, what we'll do is we'll address any questions at the end. We'll try to keep to our scheduled time and get through this, and hopefully maybe give you a little time back at the end, who knows. And that's it to get us started. So let's get started as we go down into our webinar today. We'd like to start with just a little bit about Yoyo. Yoyo is one of the leading workforce and staffing solutions providers in the country. And specifically in RPO, we're helping our clients build their recruiting strategies and recruiting solutions with them, and we're happy to have been named to HRO Today's RPO Baker's Dozen this year again. So we're pleased about that. So we're hoping that we can help you with any of the solutions you have. So let's get to what we want to talk about today. I am very pleased. We are fortunate to have someone with us who does this on a daily basis, who has some great experience, great knowledge and perspective on the practice of RPO and recruiting. So I'm happy to introduce our Director of RPO, Katie Duffy. Katie, how are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you.
All right, why don't you tell us just a little bit about you and your experience, and then we'll get started.
Sure. Hello, everyone. It's great to be with you today. And as Matt stated, I am an RPO director for Yoyo. So I am responsible for ensuring that we operationally deliver our contracted services to our client accounts.
Awesome. So you're doing this every day. I think that's the important part here, is that your experience is really going to help us today as we go through this example. So I'm Matt Rivera. I'm the VP of Marketing and Communications. And actually, I'd have to say, if I look at my picture, I think I'm wearing that same shirt today. So that's and I'm lucky enough to be the Vice President of Marketing for Yoyo, and have had a long tenure here in the staffing and recruiting industry. So all of this stuff is near and dear to my heart, and something that I talk about and work through every day. So let's get into our agenda for today. Here's how we're going to do this. I think this is going to be really cool if you stick with us. All of the, this is a kind of a big list here, but what we'll cover is we're going to talk about, we're talking about scaling, and so we're going to put this in the perspective of a solution we put in place for one of our customers, and the model and kind of the evolution of our model. So we're going to talk about a model that specifically helps to scale your workforce that we found to be very effective. And we're going to go through that in kind of a case study format. So we're going to tell you how it worked and how we talked to the customer about it, and hopefully you can take away some of those things that would address some of the issues that you might have, and some of the things that questions you might have for an RPO partner that you might have today, or if you're thinking about RPO, how this might work for you. And so we're going to use that case study as we go through this webinar to help us illustrate how this works, how we can scale without spinning out of control. And I think it's important for all of us, because I was reading an article this morning. The SHRM has a recruiting difficulty index, and it's way up there. I think it's at its highest point since about, I don't know, it went way down obviously in 2008, 2009, but it's way past the levels even prior to the Great Recession. So this is near and dear to everyone's heart. So let's do this. Before we get started here, I'd like to ask you to find your chat box. There's a box that is tethered to the webinar app where you dialed in. It has all the information. There's a box on there, a panel on there that has chat. And if you can type in there where you're calling from today, that would be interesting for us to see. It's the question box there. And I'm sorry, the question box, not the chat box, right? This is the question box. And it's going out to, hopefully all of you see that. Hopefully you can see a message from there you go, from our organizers. So I see Tampa, I see St. Louis. Katie, where are you calling from today?
Calling from Scranton, PA.
From Scranton, PA. I'm calling from Philadelphia. Lovely downtown. We got somebody from Austin. And hopefully some of you aren't in Greensboro. Hopefully some of you aren't getting some of that awful weather that's coming through. All right, great. So we have obviously quite a few folks from around the country joining us today. So great. And the good news is all the stuff that we're talking about today works in any city, I promise you. So let's talk about, let's start getting into what we want to talk about today. So today, and what we're going to talk about is a way of thinking of the evolution of RPO, not the overall practice, but kind of a maturity scale. And we've kind of put this in a visual context for you here to talk about, RPO 1.0 is kind of thinking about the cost impact and some of the basic things. And when you want to reduce the cost per hire, efficiency, and even, as you get into scalability and think about just descriptive analytics, which is a really good way to term what you're doing in the beginning. Then you get to 2.0, and you're talking about how you can really have some business impact. How are you going to improve your talent pool? And you're looking at maybe advanced analytics and things like that. And then RPO 3 is more strategic and how we can align it to the overall business strategy or your talent acquisition strategy. So this just kind of gives you that framework. And I think what we're talking about kind of here, Katie, right, is kind of going from maybe 1 to 2 or even maybe 2 up to 3. We're talking about taking it to kind of the next level. So Katie, kind of tell us why it's important that we think about it in terms of like this progression.
So Matt, part of this evolution, if you will, is change management. So it's important for an RPO partner to assist in really transforming talent acquisition into a function that supports our clients' culture and their business objectives. And that may sound easy, but it's not. It really requires constant collaboration, tailoring, educating to get to that end goal, and that being enhancing the recruitment process to achieve greater operational efficiency.
And so I think right part of the point you're getting at there too is it can't be done all in one. It'd be great if you could just do everything, all at once, but you really can't, can you?
Right. And
yeah,
right.
So,
it is a maturity. It's a natural maturity.
So this is how, and this gets into how we're going to talk about this today. So Katie, get us to the story here. So what we want to do, so for our audience, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a real life example here. And Katie's going to start now with telling us the story of what happened for this client, how we enabled them, and what enabled us to bring them this new solution. And then we're going to talk about kind of some of the, what are the terms that we're talking about, and then how it was done, and we'll get into actual costs and things like that. So Katie, why don't you tell us, give us kind of the how all this happened and kind of why we got to this performance model.
Okay. So the question of resource versus performance-based model is one that tends to be sometimes influenced by emotion than outcome. And sometimes it just fits with the company's culture, and we certainly get that. But some clients are relying on a dedicated resource-based model, which can very well be driving cost up without the benefit of improved service levels. And it's our job, at minimum, to ensure that our clients are aware of this and the options that are out there for them. So for this particular customer, we saw a need for greater workforce flexibility. The current model was restrictive, and it did not allow the resources to scale to meet the peaks and valleys of everyday business. We needed to collaborate with this partner and build a scalable recruitment function that can deliver the best possible combination of cost, quality, and speed. And Matt, just a side note, this is a 10-plus year customer, so trust was already established, and that's obviously very important when you're looking to drive change.
Absolutely, and I think that you've kind of given us that framework. So if I could just kind of paraphrase, we've got a long-term client, and things were probably going okay, but we wanted to take them maybe to kind of 2.0, or the next version, because obviously things change over time, and you want to be able to provide them with the best solution. So that's what we were talking about, right?
Correct.
And so let's go back for just a minute, and before we get too much further, because our audience have questions about what we're talking about with these two models that you just described. You said resource versus performance. So give me an idea of a little more about what is the resource model. We've got some things here, so give me an idea of what the resource model looks like.
Okay, so with both RP models, they're going to deliver a number of the same benefits, but there are differences between the two. So in a resource-based model, it is structured where you have a set number of recruiters that are dedicated, and they're likely sitting at the client site. They're delivering to SLAs, they're performing quite well. It may resemble an internal recruitment team in many ways. It may be guided by the client for greater control and visibility, and to make any sort of change to structure, process, tools, or headcount will require client approval. So that is the resource-based model, Matt.
Great, and I think that hopefully that's fairly clear. And this is kind of more of a standard model, and it's been in place for a little while, right? And when you do have a resource model in place, what are some of the implications for the RPO provider? What does that mean for the program?
Sure. So in a resource-based model, the RPO partner cannot be fully autonomous. So we can't gain all the efficiencies when we are self-directed. Even when the goals are aligned, there is still a piece of the efficiency that is lost. And we need to be able to run on our own, run at our own speed to capture all of the benefits of a self-directed RPO. And if efficiency is the ultimate goal, the true win for both parties is letting the RPO partner run. I always think of it as having the best sneakers. The ones that claim to be more flexible, lighter, fit better, may get you to that finish line faster. Your other ones will get you there, but you may not get there as fast.
Awesome. So what you've just described is kind of a set model that in some ways kind of locks some things in, and even though you have the resources and there's ways to do things, there is a different way to approach that. So why don't we talk about the performance model as a different way to approach this that we found, and tell us about kind of some of the differences in using or implementing the performance model.
Okay. The RPO performance-based service delivery model is designed with customer-centric flexibility at its core. It's armed to provide the right level of dedicated, high-touch resources balanced with efficient centers of excellence for transactional activities, and to scale your account resources based on real-time workforce needs. So for example, it's nimble enough to effectively replace a recruiter with a sourcer with no lost time in service. In a performance-based model, the RPO will be able to meet the fluctuation by scaling the recruitment team up or down as needed. And this will alleviate the client challenge or the ownership to effectively hire and fire, if necessary, a resource-based recruitment team in response to those fast-changing market and business conditions. The ownership lies with the RPO provider to make those changes in a performance-based model. And then lastly, what I would say is in a performance-based model, the outcome is what is measured versus the resources, time, and effort.
Okay, so that's great. So hopefully everybody kind of understands a little bit more about the difference now. I think that, if I could summarize that, right? So in our resource model, it's exactly like it sounds, right? It's based on those resources, and so you are dealing with a finite number of resources, and then if you had to change those or flex those, it presents some issues because you're going to have some time and a way to do that, whether you're and that really kind of, I think, is for whether you're doing it yourself or you have an RPO partner with you. You're going to have time to hire more recruiters or to change recruiters or to change duties or things like that. But if I'm hearing you, correctly with the performance-based model, it's more on the RPO provider to provide, those resources and all of everything that's necessary to meet the performance goals that you've set with the program. So it's all based on meeting those, and that all happens kind of by the RPO provider, and all of that pressure to do that is on the provider, not on the client to decide whether we need more resources or not. That sound right?
That's correct.
So I think that's a great, I think, having those, and in terms of what we were talking to our client about, right, we're talking to our client about, changing to a model that would help them do that and makes a lot of sense. So I think that that's great. We'll get into just a little more detail as we go through. So we're getting towards to almost about the halfway point now in what we've been talking about. I'd like to do a quick poll out there and just ask you guys a question if you could. So the poll will pop up on your screen. So if our organizer can put up the poll question. I see that it's up. Great. So here's the question. If you had to quickly change your recruiting resources, how would you do it? And this is, a question for anybody who's managing talent acquisition. If you had to quickly change because of a need, whatever it happens to be, what would you do? What would be your kind of first thing? So we'll give another few seconds for anybody who would like to answer the poll. And then we'll move on. We'll show you the results very quickly. So I'll ask for just anybody else who'd like to get on the poll. Just hit your answer. And I know if you're multitasking, you may not have answered the poll, but go ahead if you have a second. And let's close the poll and let's see if we can see the results. All right. And here are the results. I don't see the results, but Katie, can you see the results?
I can, yes.
Okay. Why don't you tell us what the results say?
Sure. The two highest that actually came in at the same percentage is shift current employees' responsibilities, 44%, and then the other at 44% was I'm not sure. And then coming in at 11% is hire more internal staff people.
Awesome. All right, thanks. That's great. So we can close that. So I think what you're seeing is, right, the answers are based on resources and moving those resources around, which as you've already told us, right, that could take some time. So let's get back to our case study. So Katie, remind us of the case study we've been talking about, and let's walk through the next couple of slides here, the bullets here, kind of the next couple of slides that we're going to talk about. So remind them of the case study and how we brought this idea to them of moving to this different model, and how do we convince and motivate them and to change from this resource to performance-based?
So as I stated previously, this is a long-term customer that we've partnered with. So, we had a very trusted partnership where we could come to the table with solutions and ideas. So this particular client is in a resource-based model, and the resources are performing quite well against the service level agreements. We added additional resources when volume dictated. But in early 2015, the economy experienced volatility, and this client's hiring volume dropped to levels probably going 3 years back. And as I mentioned, prior to this change, the resources to support the hiring levels had increased, leaving the client in a situation with high resource cost and an underutilized recruitment team. Flexibility and scalability were absent due to the model in place. As we move ahead and we outline the variances between both models, we'll continue to provide more insight as to our perception of the limitations of a resource-based model.
Great. So so I think what we wanted to do with the next couple of slides for our audience today is mirror kind of what we talked to them about, and these are things that you can take away. So if you see on these next few slides some things that you'd like to see in your talent acquisition program, or things that sound familiar, then you might want to take a look at more of a performance-based RPO model. I think that's where we got to with our clients. So let's talk about, Katie, when you were talking to them about this performance-based model and what would be the benefits of it, talk about some of the things that you highlighted with them.
So in a performance-based RPO model, results or outcomes are managed against contractual requirements. And you could see some of the key benefits of a performance-based model. The two that I feel are most relevant is leveraging spend and scalability, or shared resource advantages. They're closely connected. So leverage spend. The RPO partner will flex the team as volume changes, lowering the overall cost structure for our clients. We have an example of this as we move ahead, and Matt, it was eye-opening to see the cost out dollars. So you'll see that in a couple slides as we move ahead. Shared resources, I mean, it's very simple. It's basically the performance-based model helps as business changes. It will scale up or scale down when we need it to.
Sorry. So I've switched the slide there to shared resources. As you said, kind of one of the things that is the burning platform here is that when you need to scale, this kind of the idea of around this, the whole webinar today is kind of being able to scale without getting out of control. So this is really what happens in the nature of our business today. Things will change, right? So when you're looking at some of the things that you might get out of an RPO program and some of that flexibility and scalability, that's very important. But what we're highlighting today is the model, and how you do it is also important because things are changing faster than ever, right? So some of these things that you see here in these scenarios at the bottom of this slide are examples of how things can really change, right?
Sure. So we could see those scenarios and the unknown. And we know it's beneficial when you can partner with an RPO that is trusted and introduces their external expertise and best practice, tools, techniques, technology. But the best benefit of an RPO partner is leveraging their scalable infrastructure for even further advantages. And as the business moves, the resources move. It's fluid, flexible, it's nimble. And as it should be, the biggest advantage comes from the ability to connect clients with top talent. And if the objective of anyone looking at a talent acquisition program, enhancing performance by attracting and engaging the best talent in the most scalable way, then a high-performing RPO will check all and be able to provide support for these scenarios, which sometimes are very unpredictable.
Yeah, and I guess that's really kind of the big thing, right, is if you don't know what's coming, and we talk about this a lot with our clients, right, the idea of workforce planning. Everybody talks a lot about it, but it's very difficult to do because things change. When you plan, now, let's say most companies that are on a calendar basis are in budget and planning, and you plan for a lot of things, and you have something in the budget, but sometimes things change, and you find yourself that you don't have budget for resources, or you don't have what you thought you had, or you're going to hire quite a bit more or quite a bit less than you thought you were, right?
Sure, Matt. I mean, it could even be something as oil prices drop. I mean, that has an impact on our clients' hiring volume. So, there are a number of influences that will change a hiring scenario, and we need to be able to prove that we could be flexible enough to assist in those type of changes.
Yeah, and I think so that takes us to kind of my favorite slide of this slide, because it actually, if you think about it, this has a few different meanings in my mind here. It's kind of the chicken or the egg, right? So the before and the after, and then also you have kind of one chicken here, many chickens, and I've got something, and another one that kind of came to mind as we talk about it too. But tell us about when you take this and put it into practice. Again, just remind our audience what we were telling them, the kind of the before and after that could happen with this before we get into, and we'll get into some dollars and cents here too, but kind of how, again, kind of hit home what really is the difference here.
Sure. And you could see before, you don't have a lot of flexibility. It's a little bit more restrictive. You're only going to get out, what you have. Whereas when you look at the image of the after, you could see that there's a little bit more flexibility and movement going on that can help support, volatile changes that could occur. So it's a great, this picture, these images is a great summary of what we've discussed so far. And perhaps some on the call may already be thinking about the transition from a resource-based model to a performance-based model. And it's important to understand that you will also derive a number of other benefits, including improvement in cost, time to hire, as well as process efficiencies and an enhanced quality of service. And you're probably wondering why. Why can't I get that from a resource-based model? And the answer is, in a performance-based model, there's typically an RPO incentive, which in turn makes sure the program runs more efficiently. The key word here is performance. Performance is essential. Performance is the outcome. Performance is how we're measured. And so there is a greater incentive in a performance-based model to produce.
And I think you described it really well. And then one of the other meaning of this slide that I wanted to make sure that I mentioned, because again I could talk about this slide all day, is so what if you needed a cow, right? What if suddenly you had to recruit for something completely different? How does that affect your ability to be flexible, right?
Right.
So I think you covered it well. But probably one of the questions on maybe our audience on your mind right now is, well, okay, so at some point we have to get down to kind of the dollars and cents of it, and when you will get asked, and certainly goes up the ladder. It probably is a question that gets asked pretty early. So does it make a difference in how much we're paying or how much it costs, or what those kind of cost outcomes are? So we put together this model, and so tell us about some of the things on here, the resource model versus the performance model, and what that means with, I can see the total number of hires there, and those seem to be those go up, going down a little bit, but the numbers on the right there are showing some pretty significant savings. So tell us about this slide.
Sure. So this is the type of analysis is exactly what is needed when collaborating with your clients about cost optimization through a performance-based model. So we simply looked at data over 3 years. You could go back 5 years if you want. And we looked at what was invoiced in the resource-based model divided by total hires. And we derived at a cost per hire. Then we compared that to what the performance-based model would look like under those same hiring conditions. And on the right, while the savings here are incredible, or I believe they are incredible, it doesn't even take into account additional savings that can be realized through perhaps cancellations, agency spend, sourcing costs. So there's a lot more here that could be achieved, but this is just the basic analysis as a starting point.
Yeah, I think this was really interesting when we were kind of going through this, and I hadn't seen this earlier, but when we started talking about this model, when you start to put it in this context, I think what's really interesting, so tell me about, so what really hit me, one of the things, there's a couple things on here, but the cost per hire, seems to kind of go up and down with the number of hires on the resource side of it, but on the performance-based side, it stays pretty steady. Talk a little bit about that and why that is different and how that is different.
Sure. So, typically in the performance-based model, you'll have a flat cost per hire, and you'll see most of the savings came when volume went up in 2013, and that just goes to show you the benefit of scalability at its best. Being able to tap into additional resources to help pull the team through that period of time. And that's where the client is going to really leverage their spend and get the most out of their RPO partnership.
Right, and I think one of the things that's interesting here, the other thing I think is interesting here is that, you can see how easily that if your total hires really starts to go up, how your cost per hire could, correspondingly could start to climb as well, and that kind of, that could easily. We were talking, the title was kind of how to scale up without spinning out of control, and I think that would be some people's definition of starting to spin out of control, right? How could you justify continuing to add this? When it looked like you were probably at a reasonable cost for hire and probably saving a little money over maybe not having any kind of model in place. But that could really start to get out of hand, couldn't it?
It could. You have to add resources, and, absent of really good workforce planning, which, let's face it, most of our clients just don't have. It really puts a lot of burden, I'll say, onto the client to own all of that pressure, to know that they have to hire and then ultimately not know how long they need those resources.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, right? So, and we were talking about this before, that pressure, when you have the resource model is all on the client side to make those decisions, and that actually is almost like that burden is still there for them, where in a performance-based model, that pressure is now really on the RPO provider to perform, and a good provider should have already been able to resource for this, and that's what keeps those costs down, and that's what actually, more importantly, keeps the flow of candidates, keeps those jobs being filled as you go through. So I think that's a real important point for those of you on the phone when you're talking about where the pressure is in kind of this resource model, and how that shifts to RPO provider, right? And that's something that it should be, right? So that's really what we're talking about. The RPO provider should be paid on the performance they and the results they provide.
Sure.
And then one of the last questions we added to this slide was, hey, so if you're in talent acquisition, you're in HR, and you're this, what could you do with some of those additional dollars if we said we were starting to now save money? And it wasn't just, maybe procurement who gets the credit for saving money. What if you could save money?
Right.
What would you do for? So there's all kinds of fun, right? CRMs and...
Oh my goodness. I think if you ask any recruiter that doesn't have a CRM today because of restrictions and costs, if a client came to them and said, what do you want, right? I'm sure that will be number one on their list.
Yeah, so I think I think it's a great story about, sometimes you can have a model that works, but there's probably ways to improve upon it. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to have the webinar today, is look at a different way to improve upon what is a good model, and certainly a proven model in RPO. So I think this is really kind of a great slide that sums that up. All right. So we've got a few minutes left. We got about 10-15 minutes left here, and what we wanted to do at this point is leave you with a few things that can help you do an evaluation of what you have today, maybe with even your current, whatever your resources are that you use today, internally and externally. This is what we kind of looked at when we decided to do kind of the evaluation process for this, and really it's good practice, right, Katie, to do this. And it's a little bit of a simplification because we've got it down to 3, but I think our audience can really take away these. So why don't you walk us through kind of the 3 steps when we were looking at this to get us to and to help us as the partner create this program that was going to work.
So you're right. It does seem super easy, and it really is. And I think this slide intentionally looks clean and simple for that reason. So, you're going to identify the corporate talent acquisition goals. You have to make sure you're strategically aligned. The second is to evaluate 3-year cost structure. So going back in that example, and you don't have to use 3 years, but it should be at least 3 years. It could be more that you go back. Really looking for the variances to really understand what was your cost per hire, how did it change as volume went up, and how did it change as volume went down. And then you want to identify and analyze talent acquisition metrics. So what other pieces of the components that we talked about, sourcing, technology, for example. But the bottom line here is we feel we have an obligation to our clients to advise them on what's going to drive their process more efficiently. So we are aligned on their strategic goals and need to be focused on the outcomes. And a performance-based model, as we talked about, it does put more risk on the RPO partner. But even with that said, it has greater advantages as we've seen thus far.
So yeah, and I think that's really with any performance-based program, right? So the onus is on the provider to really provide that level of service and performance that is agreed upon, and this model just kind of puts that into a framework that allows that, I think, to work better, right? It allows it to work in a more efficient manner that makes sense, rather than some of the things you talked about before, where with resources you get a little bit handcuffed in what you can and can't do and how fast you can react. With this, there's a lot more freedom and flexibility to react, and I think that's what everybody's looking for. So when you go through this evaluation process, it's really about aligning these things, the goals, and looking at your structure and your costs, and then how you're going to measure it, which is obviously critical to what you're doing, and then designing what will work. So I think what we found is, and what you were telling me about was we finished when we finish the evaluation process, we have this, we come out with a couple of things, and again, this is really highly simplified, but it's how we can structure the initial process and resource and the resources we're going to put in place, the pricing and the service level agreement, so that it makes sense for what they're trying to achieve. And if you think back, and if everyone in the audience can think back to the slide about the progression from RPO 1 to RPO 2 to RPO 3, mm-hmm. It's kind of like that, right? So you're kind of setting the stage for the ability to do that, to go to the next level, right. This evaluation. And then what I'd say lastly on this is that this is just good practice for anybody who's looking at what they're doing in talent acquisition, is to look at some of these things and realize where you have issues, or where it's taking longer than you want it to, where it's costing more than you want it to, what types of resources you do and don't have to work with, and that helps you to make those decisions. And certainly, for the an RPO provider coming in, it helps them to evaluate what the best mm-hmm. model is and how to best implement it.
Right. So I would say here you're at a point where there is an agreement to transition. And now it's time for the discussion around what needs to change. So do the service level agreements change? So because remember, resource-based is on time and effort, and performance-based is outcome. So I'd imagine there needs to be changes to your service level agreements. Are there process changes? Are there resource changes? Are you going to swap out a recruiter for a sourcer or for a data analyst person? I mean, so those are questions that you need to ask when you come to this stage of that agreement on transitioning.
Yeah, I think that's really kind of the point that we got to with this client, right? Is it makes sense, and this is how we got there. So if you could kind of sum up for us, we've talked now through the case study, and we're at that point. What really kind of the results that we gained out of this, that the client, I think most importantly, gained out of this, and why this performance-based model is effective to help a company to scale up without spinning out of control, as we said. But really, you've got a whole list of good things here that resulted from moving to this model, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I mean, I would say first, we know there is a greater demand for workforce flexibility. So I think we could just all sit back internally and say we wouldn't be doing our job if we didn't come to the table with this in mind and with solutions. And that's where I'd say we'd be failing some of our clients. So, the first step perhaps for some on this call is simply beginning an RPO engagement, if not already. The structure of any RPO engagement is unique. So we all know it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. We talked about how culture and emotion plays into the type of model selected by a customer. We know scalability is a key benefit, but it's not the only value of an RPO engagement. So I know many that are on this call likely know that there's so many other additional key benefits and values from an RPO partnership. Ongoing improvement of our client's recruitment process is essential, and it's just really the heart of furthering the trusted partnership piece. So you could see, on this particular slide, showing the expertise, the innovation to change, cost out options, changing the infrastructure to scale, and just that agility to move quickly with our client's business.
Yeah, and I think really for those that have to manage this, for the talent acquisition professionals that are out there and HR professionals that are out there, right, this is really kind of what you're bringing. When you look at a model like this and you look at RPO, you're creating the center of excellence for your organization in this area, and this is what we found, and I think one of the comments that you made to me is one of the reasons we wanted to put this together and talk about this today was because some of this information, and there's a lot of different information about RPO out there, but there wasn't really anything that specifically spoke to how this could be a performance-based situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of different kind of definitions of RPO out there and things that make it a little hard to discern, what exactly will work and when and how. And I think this is a great example of the progression of how you can take something like the idea of outsourcing and recruiting to a provider or to a partner and make it really work well for you and continue to evolve it. So I think that's great. I think we covered a lot in what we talked about today. So we have a little bit of time now. If you'd like to ask any questions, and I have a couple already, so I'm just going to jump in, but please continue to ask any questions, and if there's anything else you'd like to know. One of the things, Katie, I noticed that came up earlier, you were talking about cancellations and when requisitions come through. So how does the performance-based model affect requisition cancellations? And I guess that's when something comes through, a rec comes through, and then it just gets canceled and kind of dies.
Sure. So a lot of the transition between a resource-based model and a performance-based model is a behavior change, evolves from that. So in a resource-based model, a requisition could cancel, and even though there was a lot of time and energy that the recruiter spends on the intake session and the strategy and the screening, the rec could cancel, and really there's no impact. In a performance-based model, that recruiter who's focused on outcome, that time spent that they can't get back really changes the behavior of driving to an outcome. And so what we just see a natural maturity of cancellations becoming less and less. That recruiter is really, during that intake call, asking all of those essential questions to ensure the manager has the approval, to ensure that they have, the budget, that they are ready and willing to spend the time and engagement on the front end. So we just see, Matt, just a natural evolution of behavior that stems when you are in a performance-based model.
Great, again, you speak to kind of taking things to the next level, right, for everybody involved. We have another question, I think was asked a little bit earlier here. One of our audience members would like to know your thoughts about Myers-Briggs or personality tests, or I think assessments kind of in general, and the way companies should use those. So talk a little bit about assessments for us.
Sure. So, I think as an RPO provider, our job is to really provide the best practices, our knowledge, how other clients are utilizing them, what are the results, how is it impacting the talent selection process. So I think it's a unique question that really needs, probably need to dig in deeper to look at the data. But, what our job would be is to really come to the table with solutions, and, show where we have like clients utilizing those personality assessments and where it's having impact and perhaps maybe where it's not having impact. So we could educate them on both sides.
Right, so you could kind of bring that as a best practice and say, hey, you might want it in this case, but if this is, the kind of hiring you're doing or the environment or the process or whatever it happens to be, then maybe this would not be, or a specific type of test, right? When they have and I think that's a good point, right? So it could be a specific type, and you can say, well, I hear a lot about Myers-Briggs, and you as a provider, as a partner, could say, well, we have, this number of customers that are using it, or they've switched to this one, or it used to be all Myers-Briggs, now it's this. So bringing that kind of insight and best practice, I think, good. So one question we got just a couple more questions here in the last couple of minutes we have, but why, is there really any benefit to a resource-based model for RPO? Why would a company choose that?
You know, as I mentioned earlier, it really is control. It really is about control, and it's just a preference, you know, client preference. And you know, we certainly want to satisfy that client. You know, and if it's a resource-based model, because there is consistency in their hiring numbers, then that's something that we'll support. But again, where we saw the market changing and the volatility, and we saw a change to their hiring patterns, we needed to come to the table. You know, that's our job, to come out and say, you need less people. You don't have the hiring volume that you need. And that puts the ownership and the pressure onto us. It changes our financial structure. But if you are focused on outcomes and the greater good of the partnership, then it has those advantages.
Gotcha. And I think we've kind of gone over some of those. And one question that did come up, another question I'm seeing here in the panel is that, you know, which I think we've kind of covered a little bit, but just go back to which model poses more risk to the company, to the client, in your opinion, as we've gone through and kind of looked at both and had both and certainly have worked with clients in both kind of environments. What would you say poses more risk to the client?
Sure. I would say, you know, just the resource-based model is restrictive. So it doesn't allow us to move as effectively and efficiently as we would want to as an RPO provider. It could even be something as simple as wanting to introduce a new sourcing tool that costs money. Well, we need to go justify that. We need to bring that strategy to the table. We need to wait for approval. We could have lost, you know, 5+ days or more. Whereas in a performance-based model, we'd start that immediately. You know, that onus is ours. And so that's where you could see where the restrictions may cause for, you know, a program that doesn't run as optimally as it needs to.
And I think that sums it up really well. So I think that's the last question I see. And I think you did a great job of describing there at the end why, you know, it makes sense and the differences between the two. So, so thank you, Katie, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
We appreciate it, and thank you all to our audience out there. I want to remind you that this webinar, other webinars, lots of information about that we have some ebooks and some other resources that we can provide to you on the yo.com and on our RPO page that you can download if you want to know more information. We do have a cost and models ebook on there that's very informative if you're just starting out or you want to get some more information on that. And we do have other webinars and other things that you can take advantage of off of yo.com, yoh.com. So we'd like to thank everybody for your time today. Hope you have a nice rest of your day wherever you are, and thank you for joining us.